Hi, welcome to a new video here. This is a bit of a long-form project that I've been working on for a long time. And what better day to release this than the 20th anniversary of the Halo series as a whole. Something that's very near and dear to my heart. I think there's something to be said about the incredible artistic direction in this series. Because it's not just a shooter. It's not just a video game about killing aliens. It's not just a piece of media that has no soul to it. There's a lot that it has to say about the human identity and the spirit of survival and the ways that we interact with religious discourse too. There's lots of really interesting themes at play there, but that's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I'm here to talk about is the really incredible sound direction of the series as a whole. Especially, I'm going to be discussing in this first part of this series of video essays. There's probably going to be 3 in total. Hopefully 3. They might end up overlapping into more, but over this series I'll be talking about diegetic sound design and how the effects work and direction in the series is indicative of the characters and stories that it portrays, as well as the world building identified within it. This specific part will be talking about weapon sound design and how these effects sort of correlate to real world ideas, and also how we as audio designers can create soundscapes as intricate and detailed as this. I think that one of the things that I want to do with this channel, and something that I've set out to do as a composer and artist in the audio field for as long as I can remember, is to create more media for emerging sound artists. There's a lot of troubleshooting that we have to go through in this field, just trying and seeing what works. And I think that something that I can do with this video and with many of the things that I'm hoping to create in the future is provide resources, provide better access to these tools that we as sound designers can use, and demonstrate some of the philosophies behind audio design that I think are very effective in putting forth the image we want to create. So that's sort of the thesis behind this, and let's get into this. Halo is a game that feels real. Now, I don't entirely mean that it sounds realistic or anything like that, no. We have no idea what plasma rifles or energy shields would sound like in real life, so there's no point in real-world comparison here. What I mean is that it feels like a real world within the context of the story, and a lot of this realism comes not only from the incredible storytelling or artistic design, but its masterful diegetic sound and the design philosophy behind it. Let's quickly go over the concept of design philosophy and how creators approach a project. When we talk about design philosophy, we're talking about the thematic and mental approach that a designer takes to any given project. I think the best way to show this is just with some examples of different design philosophies and their interpretation through various media. Since any design philosophy is just the approach that a creator takes when starting a new project, they aren't really bound by genre or medium, but they are affected and influenced by them. For example, an artist tackling a grounded project with heavy themes and a serious tone, something like a film adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird, probably wouldn't work with the concepts of humor and fantastical elements in mind. The story relies on its groundedness and a philosophy that reflects this. Instead, their philosophy would probably focus on the human tragedy of the story, emphasizing the class and race struggle and the poverty faced by the primary actors in the story. This might come through in design centered on an earthen color palette to reflect the small rural town setting, musical compositions using period-accurate instrumentation and musical conventions, and shot composition that visually imply the class and standing of the characters involved. Looking at the example that I laid out here, we can create a sort of template for the average media creation. Step 1, identification of inspiration. Step 2, thematic and tropic identification in relation to the themes of the project. Step 3, adoptage and standardization of design philosophy. Step 4, lastly, implementation of this design philosophy in usage of the project. Usually, popular media within a stylistic and thematic group tends to have overlap of design philosophies, and that's why we see so many games and movies that use the same tired tropes and concepts. Because rather than go through the full process of creating an individually unique design philosophy to implement in their project, many creators in established genres adopt the same design philosophy, and in turn methodology, from previously successful works. That's not necessarily to say that that's a bad thing, but it definitely can contribute to a feeling of stagnancy. Consider the whole idea of a tired trend, sort of coming from increasingly similar works within a genre. That's what we're talking about here. Sometimes, however, a work comes along that subverts our expectations in regards to standard design philosophy in media. Sometimes, rather than taking from popular current interpretations of a trope or thematic design, media subverts our expectations by drawing on a different aesthetic to draw new and interesting interpretations that have yet to be seen in the medium. Halo does this immensely well, as rather than draw on traditional influences within the first-person shooter genre, it instead has deep roots in a form of futurism popular in the 70s and 80s that I feel is yet to be named well, which I'm going to call analog futurism. This genre is made up of media like Star Trek, early Star Wars, and the original Alien. Science fiction media which portrays a far future which relies primarily on realistic interpretations of future tech, reminiscent of what was considered cutting edge at the end of the 20th century and early 21st century. Take a look at any of these projects with this in mind, and you'll see a trend. Sharper, more believable designs for fantastical machines like faster-than-light spacecraft. Phasers and blasters that look like evolutions of modern weapons. Holograms and display screens that share the same artifacting for some reason as CRT technology. Even electronic equipment that mimics the conventions of period computers and early DOS. This media juxtaposes the utopian idea of far future with the harsh reality of technological development and its limitations, portraying space and the vastness of things found within it as a Wild West. In many of these cases, they do so as a means of showcasing the light of humanity and passion, even when light is nowhere to be seen. Halo follows in these footsteps with its design philosophy, but rather than display a galaxy of equal footing like some of the more hopeful analog futurist media does, it basks in the fearful nature of its juxtaposition. It pits humanity against a far greater threat. A threat that has transcended humanity's analog space age and poses an existential question of might against right and the power of religious zealotry. But this video isn't about that exactly. This video is about the sound design that makes these concepts breathe, the diegetic audio design philosophy that the composition and audio team put into practice in developing sounds to make this vision come to life. Before we move on, I know some of you are going to be asking, what do I mean by diegetic sound? In the context of this video, I don't exactly mean it in the same way that the term is usually applied to musicals and film to discuss whether a song is actually experienced by the characters. but in the context of separating the in-universe sound design from the beautiful non-diegetic score and artistic sound elements of the series. This can range from the voice acting and direction, the weapon and vehicle effects work, to the environmental and ambient sound, to many of the audio minutiae found in the series. Essentially, in this video, as well as in the next in the series tackling Halo's sound design, I will be talking about all aspects of the sound that the characters in the story can actually hear themselves. Released to massive critical and market success in 2001 after years of turbulent developmental changes, Halo Combat Evolved is one of the most recognizable shooters of the early 2000s, as well as the progenitor of the multi-billion-dollar franchise the series is today. It's also a lot more than that to many people who have played it. To many, Halo CE was an introduction to a densely developed and immersive new science fiction world, a world unlike any that had entered the gaming scene before it. A major factor in its immersion was the focus of this video essay, its sound design. To show what I mean for anyone who might be going to this video without a background in Halo, I'm going to play some clips from various parts of the game, some ambient and some active. I'll also continue to play the relevant sound effects as we go through the video, so don't worry about aspects you might be unfamiliar with.
Roger that. We'll be able to find our way to the control center from here.
Good luck. Full hammer out.
One of the most defining and impressive aspects of the sound design in CE is the sheer diversity of sounds for every situation. When file diving, I found that not only were there multiple variants of sound for every weapon, but that many of these variants were affected by environmental context. For example, when firing a shotgun, there are different shell effects for dirt, metal, and thin metal flooring categories, as well as several variants within each of these subcategories. This may be standard in today's audio industry, but at the time of CE's development in the late 90s, this level of attention to detail was uncommon. What makes these incredibly varied sounds more impressive, as well as being the main thesis behind this video, is their diegesis. Their sounds and their variants provide insight into the world of the Halo series at the core of their design, reflecting the conditions of their creation, the environments they are used in, and the people that wield them. Since I just used them as an example, let's start with the shotgun sound effects. When we look at shotgun sounds in games, we often hear a lot of the same stock big boom type sounds, high treble, high reverb. This isn't necessarily bad, and even this game that I'm majorly praising does in fact use a stock sound as its reloading base, specifically a 1982 sample of a Mossberg 500 series 12-gauge pump shotgun. What I think makes the Halo CE shotgun so unique, though, is its detailed mixing and the way that it represents human technology in the game's time frame. I'm going to go on a slight tangent here, so stick with me because I promise this will make sense at the end. As mentioned earlier in the video, the early Halo games draw very much from the aesthetic influences of mid to late 20th century science fiction, especially 1979's Alien for their concept of what human technology might be like. This lo-fi, analog futurist sci-fi visual design implies a deep connection to the late 20th century, early 21st century that has somehow endured into Halo's 26th century military humanity in the form of CRT-style displays, combustion-based vehicle tech, ballistic weapons, DOS-reminiscent terminals, and much more. In Halo, however, rather than being an aesthetic of turmoil, this is more an aesthetic of a galaxy in transit. At this point in the story, humanity has been spread thin over the stars, colonizing the far reaches under the idea of one galactic UN, essentially. Paralleling real-world history in this era of brave new worlds, the colonists have become disillusioned with the centralized government that always neglects and abuses them for their own needs. This is the state of humanity when they are first interacting with the Covenant, the major alien threat of the Halo series. They're on the back foot, they're fighting amongst themselves, they're stuck in a military-industrial cycle that relies on old tech to keep resources in check. Let's just keep this in mind, and I'll get back to the shotgun. As I said before I went on that little tangent about Halo history and in-game lore and all that kind of stuff, this weapon uses the real-world Mossberg 500 series pump gun as a basis for its reloading sound, and potentially for its firing sound, but I was unable to confirm this in my research. However, in typical Halo fashion, there's more depth to the design than we see at the surface level. Just as how the visual design implies a rooting in the technology of the past caused by extenuating circumstances, the sound implies this same juxtaposition of outdated technology in futuristic setting. This shotgun is not all that it appears. When we look at the sound, we can immediately see that, while it demonstrates all the traits of a familiar shotgun sound, it augments certain aspects to reflect the history and nature of the weapon in-universe. The bass levels are higher than expected for a typical shotgun sound, while the treble mix is lower. There's more of a metallic edge than is usually depicted. This acts as a form of audio shorthand for weight and power, which reflects the truth of the weapon. This thing is hefty for what it looks like. Seriously, as silly as that may sound for an explanation, let me clarify. In the real world at the time, the highest power commonly available in terms of buckshot shells is 15 pellet Magnum double-aught buck, basically a very powerful shell with a high load of large pellets and a doubled weight of gunpowder for what is typical. This is the standard ammunition for this weapon, and it holds a full magazine of 12 rounds, much larger than what is actually physically possible in a comparable real-world shotgun. This weightiness and force is reflected in gameplay too, as the weapon has a much longer effective range than your typical video game shotgun, to the point of being usable as a pseudo-sniper at points. Its high-yield shot, sleek metallic build, precision design, all with relatively low-tech materials, are all perfectly reflected in these sounds, undeniably so, to the point where you can even tell where and how the weapon is being used in-game. As I said before, it has different firing sounds to reflect the weapon in anything from an open-air, dirt floor environment on the ring to the tight metal corridors on the Pillar of Autumn. And this is just one weapon that reflects on the whole human design philosophy for the series. Now, if this explanation seemed a little convoluted and long-winded, don't worry, we've got more to go through here that I think will sufficiently elaborate on what I mean when I'm talking about these weapons, as reflective of their nature and usage. Sticking with human weapons, let's go to the Magnum, what I would consider the signature weapon of Halo CE. This gun also has a very high base output for what you'd expect as a pistol, as well as a very short decay compared to the real-world comparable handguns. Again, this is reflective of the unusual power and velocity of the weapon, as the Magnum fires what are called in-universe semi-armor-piercing, high-explosive rounds. This power is further reflected in the chambering of the weapon. The Magnum is chambered in a massively high-caliber round for a pistol, 12.7 by 40 millimeters to be exact. This, coupled with the fact that it is capable of both semi and full automatic fire, means that the sound design at play here is working double duty, signaling both the weapon's capacity for speed and raw power with its short, crisp, explosive audio quality. For a quick comparison, I'm going to play the Magnum firing sound for you all, as well as an example of its closest real-world counterpart, a Desert Eagle chambered in .50 AE.
And that that right there, guys, is all you want in a semi-automatic pistol. So
on the other end of the spectrum, let's look at some of the Covenant weapons, things that have no real-world counterpart or precedence for what they might sound like. Here we're going to have some fun, though. I'm going to play 3 Covenant weapon sounds, along with showing a list of their names and designs, and have all you viewers in the comments below guess which sound matches which one. I'll provide the answers as I analyze the sound design for each entry, and you can see how well you either guessed or remembered them. With the plasma pistol, we immediately see Halo's subversive design philosophy rearing its head. While other media with plasma-based weaponry has established a wide-reaching shorthand of electrical sounds with sharp crackling design, Halo opts for an interesting twist, a wet, bouncing hum, kind of like bass strings wobbling but high-pitched, a sound like flexing metal or hot steel touching water. It's a very threatening sound that belies the nature of its projectiles as concentrated, unstable energy that can and will burn a hole in whatever it touches. This plasma is not like the plasma of other games and movies. It will not flow like electricity. It will cut a hole through anything in its way. Speaking of cutting a hole through anything in its way, the fuel rod gun. This thing is immensely powerful and fires rods of an unstable radioactive material, acting as a sort of high-powered Covenant mortar/rocket launcher. The sound design reflects the nature of this weapon in a really unique way, with a sliding metallic firing noise that glissandos downwards in pitch, as if the projectile is falling away from the barrel of the weapon. This leads into a crisp and crackling explosive sound. It's much more mechanical sounding than your usual rocket weapons are. I think the only design more intricate than this is a weapon that's clearly the most unique in the game. Crystal clearly, you might say. That's right. It's time to talk about the Needler. As humble and overlooked as it is, its genius is evident in every aspect of its design. It looks vaguely insectoid, bulbous and spiked, and somehow fires shards of volatile pink crystal that track enemies and explode when they reach critical mass, in a state known as super combining. Unlike almost any other weapon from Halo, I know of zero sound design precedents for how this might work. There's no established audio shorthand for explosive tracking crystals that I know of, But somehow the audio team at Bungie made sounds that evoked that exact concept clear as day. The rough clicking of metal against crystal, something I'm very familiar with as a rockhound myself, comes through in idle animations, reloads, and firing, while the projectiles themselves make a crisp, bouncing sound when fired, like glass and springs pulled taut. The explosion from super combining makes me think of a kitchen being torn down, with plenty of glass and ceramic shrapnel and concussive force in the sound, an indescribable mix of calamitous noise energy. This is mastery of intention. This is diegetic focused audio design philosophy at its finest, creating sounds that have no realistic counterparts and yet convey a very realistic sense of what is intended to be conveyed to the audience. Looking at all of these examples, what can we as sound designers take away from this, though? I think the greatest takeaway is the variety and ingenuity and the intentionality of all these sounds. The audio designers could have easily just gone out and done field recordings of various guns with minimal editing, or the typical Star Wars hit a cable with a wrench blaster sound, which was innovative for its time, to be fair, but instead they chose to innovate for the 21st century and explore new interpretations of sounds to reflect the world they wanted to create. When we as audio designers and composers and sound artists in general work to develop a cohesive design philosophy before we begin a project, when we look at the standard within a genre we're trying to work in and find ways to subvert them, when we collaborate with the other artists involved in a project to gain the best understanding of the worlds and soundscapes we're trying to create, we can elevate this medium to new heights of expression, as was done back in 01 by the team at Bungie. Next time you work on a project, consider how you might elevate your ambient sounds by using the hum of fluorescence slowed to 50% in low pass to mimic the sounds of electricity running through an ancient building, or how you might turn that piano sample you have into a new creature sound using layering and phasing or any other wild and creative concepts. That is the soul of Halo's audio design. That is the soul of audio design as an art form. And that's something that I think we can all take away from this, is to re-examine our preconceptions of how we do our work and how we create things. Now, I know I've just covered weapons audio and the concepts of diegesis and design philosophy here, and we're already reaching critical mass for one video, but I think this audio in this game deserves a lot more than just to be summed up as the guns sound really good. So I'm gonna make another 2 parts, like I said before, coming in the next few months. An optimistic take says the next part should be up probably by February or something like that, and that should cover dialogue, voice acting, and audio direction for the various alien species across the series. Closer to March. But I hope to put out some smaller videos on composition, audio design, and other artsy things in the meantime. So please keep an ear out, and please leave a like if you liked it, a dislike if you didn't, some criticism or compliments in the comments, and drop a sub if you're new. Stay creative, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for coming.